In today's video, I'm going to go over my graphics settings for Delta Force, as some people have asked me in the comment section to actually share them, so I figured I'd make a video on this. So I just want to cover one quick game setting here, which is scope magnification adapts automatically. So if you have it set to off, it's going to actually zoom in further when you're using optics like a red dot sight. If I zoom in, it zooms in quite a bit, but then if I turn this on, you can see it zooms in a little bit less. So this is also based off of your FOV. I prefer having this set to off. Moving on to the graphics settings here. So make sure it's using the proper monitor. Make sure it's using the proper display adapter. In my case, 4080 Super. The display mode, you could have it set to borderless windowed if you wanted to, if you're alt tabbing out a lot. As far as I know, and I'm not an expert on any of this, full screen gives you the best input latency. But if you're alt tabbing pretty frequently out of your game, you want to have it on borderless windowed, and it doesn't seem to affect performance that much. Resolution, make sure it's the correct resolution that you have. Display refresh rate, I have it set to 240 because that's my monitor's refresh rate. Display area aspect ratio, mine is 16:9 for the ratio. You could have a bigger one that's 21:9, 32:9. I just leave it set to auto, but you can go and play around with that if you want. The frame rate caps, I have both of these set to unlimited, so in game the frame rate will go as high as it can. Same thing for out of match. If you set the out of match frame rate cap to 60, for example, your firing range and your black sight in operations will also be capped at 60, so keep that in mind. The sharpness, I kept it at 50. There's not a ton of performance difference between 0 and 100. It just really depends on your personal preference. So if I keep it set to 50 here, this is what you're looking at. And then if I bump it up, for example, to 100, you can see everything's a little bit more sharp, but I personally find it's a little bit harsh on the eyes, so I kept it at 50. As for VSync and NVIDIA FastSync, I actually don't use any of these. From my knowledge, it limits your FPS to your monitor's refresh rate, so I'm not currently using those. FOV, I'm running default FOV at 120, so that is your actual character FOV, and then vehicle third person FOV is at 100. Scope magnification, so what this does, if you turn it on, it will actually make the zoom more realistic. So if I take out my weapon here, you can see only the scope actually zooms in, as opposed to having it set to off, your whole screen will zoom in. Now, it might seem more realistic, and this way it doesn't seem realistic at all, but it can block off a lot of the details. So if I turn it back to on here, you can see that when I move around, you're not actually seeing everything that is in front of you. So I have this set to off. Now moving on to the basic graphics here, I'll explain these as best as I can. Anti-aliasing, it basically smooths jagged edges. I just find it makes the game look blurry and or fuzzy, and it does impact performance quite a bit, so that's why I have it set to off. Weapon motion blur, I absolutely hate motion blur in every first-person shooter that I play. That's why I have it off. Reflections, they don't really look different between settings, but the higher settings slightly lower the frame rate for apparently no reason, so I just have it set to low. Texture filtering, it doesn't really affect the game look. I think the setting is bugged though, because turning it to low or ultimate doesn't really affect the VRAM usage, so I don't actually know if this works or not. Ambient occlusion, it simulates how light interacts with objects throughout the world. Basically, certain objects will cast more shadows. I can barely tell the difference, and the higher settings negatively impact performance, so I just set it to low. And honestly, in such a fast-paced game like Delta Force, you're probably not stopping to look at shadows. Particles will affect explosions and such, and oddly enough, it also adds some types of lens flare to light sources, which can obfuscate your vision when looking at enemies behind a light source, so I have this set to low. Distortion doesn't seem to affect the visuals or performance of Delta Force, so I just kept it set to low. Scene details also doesn't seem to have much of an effect on performance or visuals, except on objects or terrain at super long ranges. Might look a little scuffed, but I still kept this option set to low. Scene view distance, however, is quite costly on FPS and will actually slightly change the textures of certain assets at distance. I would definitely keep this on low because it does cost quite a bit of performance. The rendering scale, so basically if you wanted to upscale what you're seeing, so if I'm using 1080p right now, if I wanted to upscale it to like 1440p, this is where I would do it, but I just keep it at 100. Depth of field, I hate it, so basically what this does, if I go on and go apply, you can see my weapon's kind of blurred there. If I turn it back to off, you can see everything's just clear, so I just prefer not having it blurred at all. Global illumination quality looks the same no matter the setting, but is best kept on low for max performance. The shaders, this affects things like water puddles on the ground, for example. They look more realistic versus low, where it looks like kind of a flat texture on top of the ground. And for some reason, it also affects foliage and how it interacts with the wind. In any case, it does affect performance, so I kept it on low. Textures look the same no matter the setting you're using, and actually if you put it to low versus ultimate, it doesn't increase or decrease VRAM usage, so I think this setting is probably bugged, so I just kept it to low. Streaming is pretty costly on FPS, and it actually affects how many details there are on like the ground. So looking at this road here, you can see it's pretty clean. There's rubble here, but the road starts and there's like basically nothing on the actual road. But if we were to set this to ultimate, not only does it vastly increase the VRAM usage, you'll see it also adds quite a bit of details here. So you can see there's like leaves on the ground, there's pieces of cardboard right there. So there's basically just debris all over, and there's also that tarp like thing right there. But if I turn it back to low, all that will simply go away. So it makes your game look a lot cleaner, a lot less cluttered. It does affect performance quite a bit, but if you want a world that looks a little bit more lived in, maybe you want to have it on, but for max performance, I would set it off, and this also helps with visibility. So shadows only affects your soldier shadows, and you can barely tell the difference in performance and quality, so I kept this on low. Shadow map, however, will affect the shadows of everything across the map, so this is quite costly. If we put it on ultimate use here, you can see the VRAM usage is getting quite high versus low, so I just kept this set to low. Honestly, again, in such a fast-paced game, you're not really stopping to look at shadows. Post-processing, so this will introduce chromatic aberration in the game. If I put this light post in my peripheral vision here, let's just look like this. Right now it's on low. If I put it to ultimate, you'll see there's going to be like some kind of like little lens distortion there. You can see there's like a little bit of magenta, maybe on the edges, blue. So I don't like having this. I think it just makes games look bad. So I have it set to low. That way there's no light coming off of those. So it's basically simulating lens distortion that you'd have in like a picture that you're taking with an actual real camera. But I personally don't like it in video games, and it is costly on performance. Volumetric fog will basically introduce fog into the game. So if we have it set to ultimate, you'll see here the game looks a little bit more foggy. So if we look like over here, you can see there's like a little bit of fog out in the distance over here and over here. If I have it set to low, all that is just going to go away and makes the game look a lot more clear. So as you can see here, it's all clear now. Same thing for here. So again, better for visibility. Finally, for animation, didn't really tell any difference between low and ultimate, and it doesn't really seem to affect VRAM performance, so this might be bugged as well. And finally, for super resolution, I have this set to off. Game actually runs better with it off, but if you have maybe a weaker system, you might want to have this set to on and use whatever one matches your GPU. You could still use AMD Fidelity FX Super Resolution if you have an NVIDIA card, and vice versa. And then when you have these set to on, you can actually pick like the super resolution quality. So quality, balance, performance, but I just have this set to off. And as for reflex low latency, I also have this set to off. So technically this is supposed to increase or decrease system input latency. I haven't really felt it set to off versus low latency versus enhanced, and having it set to enhanced decreases the overall frame rate that you're getting, but it does tell you up here it enabled to improve system latency. NVIDIA Reflex will also attempt to optimize the latency in CPU bottleneck scenarios, which may increase GPU power consumption and potentially affect frame rates. So I just have this set to off, but you might need this if you're in that specific situation. So when you're done setting all of this up, make sure you hit recompile shaders, so the next time that you start your game, it'll actually recompile whatever it needs to, and then you should be good to go and get awesome performance, awesome visibility, and minimal to no stuttering whatsoever. And before I forget, I also turn off or close the launcher completely when I'm actually playing Delta Force. This seems to maybe help with performance a little bit more, and there's no reason for the launcher to be on running in the background using some of your CPU. This might help you a lot if you have somewhat of a weaker system. Of course, your mileage may vary depending on what the system you have is. If you have a weaker CPU, weaker GPU, you might want to play around with some of these settings like super resolution mode, but overall I feel like this was giving me the best performance in Delta Force. So once again, I'm not an expert on any of this. This is just what I found worked best for me. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section down below. I'll do my best to answer them. In any case, hit the like button if you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and as always, thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good one.